Hello, my name is Ása and I'm here with the course Lærum Íslensku or Let's Learn Icelandic, and this is lesson number 8 or kennslustund nummer 8. Today I'm going to talk about the letter K or K like we call it in Icelandic. Overall it's a relatively simple letter, I would say. The only reason why I'm doing only this one is that it just doesn't really go with any other letter, and also because the last few lessons have been quite tough. I think we've been dealing with difficult letters, so I think it's nice to get one lesson that's a little bit easier. Like I've mentioned in many of the previous lessons, Icelandic is a very breathy language, so we breathe a lot while we talk, and this is especially true about the letter K. In fact, I don't think I know any language that is more breathy than Icelandic. Icelandic is breathy to the level that when I try to speak languages that are not breathy at all, like Finnish for example, like then I start to feel, my lungs start to feel claustrophobic because there's no breath in it, and it's like, when will it get out? When will it get out? So it's like, when do Finnish people even breathe? Do Finnish people breathe? For an Icelandic person, it's very natural to use a lot of breath when we talk, but for foreigners, this might not be. So now I'm going to go a little bit over it, and I'm sure you will figure it out. Single K in Icelandic is quite simple, I would say. It's the same sound as, for example, in car in English, except we use a slightly more breath to it, but it's not too crazy, let's see. And single K can be anywhere. It can be at the beginning of the word, in the middle and at the end, everything goes. And one example of a word that starts with K and has K in the beginning is, for example, the word kirkja, kirkja. And this means church. So if you're traveling around Iceland and you see all these long names that are something blah 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 kirkja, then you know it's an old church. That might be nice to look at if this is something that you like. And as you notice, when I say kirkja, the first K comes with quite a lot of H, but the second K comes with less H. And this is typically when you have KJ, then the H is slightly less. But overall, you should be quite breathy when you say words that have a single K. But be careful with the spelling of the word kirkja, because we also have the verb að kirkja, which is pronounced exactly the same, but has a Y instead of the I, and this actually means to strangle someone. So in this case, spelling is important, so just be aware of that. When we have two Ks, this is really the time where the breathing gets completely out of control, but where it's really excessive. And and this is very common in Icelandic, so we have many words with double K, and when natives speak it, they always use a lot of breath. One example is the very useful word takk, which just means thank you or thanks. Thanks is probably more accurate. And this is exactly the same word that is in all the other Scandinavian languages. For example, in Danish you say like tusind tak, which means like 1,000 thanks, like tusind tak. But instead of saying tak or tak, a little bit like this, the Icelandic just do the same but with a lot of breath. So it's like tak, 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 or takk fyrir. So takk fyrir means thanks for something. Another very useful word is the word ekki, and this means not. So this means not, so of course it's a very useful word, and we use it quite similarly as you would in English. So if you want the double K, you have to really use a lot of breath, and you say takk og ekki, takk og ekki. Another kind of funny word is Kakalaki, and this means cockroach in Icelandic. But we don't really have them so much, so it's not so useful, but it's just funny and has the double K 2 times, so it's useful for pronunciation. Kakalaki. But here comes the good news. So if you have trouble with this really heavy, breath-heavy K, actually it doesn't matter so much. I mean, it's more like nice to have than something that's absolutely necessary. If you pronounce a double K without the breathing, it will be something like ekki, 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 something like this. And honestly, this is how most foreigners, I would say, pronounce ekki. And it's very easily understandable. So it's just basically an accent. It's very obvious that you're not a native, but it's something that is very easy to understand. And it doesn't sound ugly to us, it's actually kind of cute. So it's not exactly a big deal. It's just that if you want it more authentic, then you will try to use like a lot of breath. But if you have difficulties with this, it's probably better to skip it. Like if you, for example, want to put a sound with the H, then better just not do it at all. So then just say ekki, and then the Icelandic people will say ekki, but all the communication will still be there. So this very breathing sound, it's very Icelandic, but if it's just a matter of communicating, then it's just a nice to have, but it's not absolutely necessary. I hope that makes your life a little bit easier. But now comes a little bit of, don't want to say bad news, it's not so horrible, but a slight complications of the simple picture that I showed before. And this is when we have T directly after a K. Okay, like I mentioned before, many versions of Icelandic grammar come by adding T to the root of the word. And when you do this, it's very difficult to say K and then T, both very clear, like kt, kt, kt. This sound we don't usually have, so then we sort of make the K super soft. And one example of this is, for example, the word stacht, stacht. And then you see we get this soft sound that is exactly the same as the soft G sound that I talked about in the previous lesson. So stacht, which means like a single, discrete, neutral object. It's the neutral form of the word single. Then you have exactly the same sound as you would, for example, in the word sacht. So stacht, sacht. Then it doesn't really matter if it's G or K. You cannot really tell the difference. Even if you have a double K, this stays the same. For example, the word skacht, skacht. So this is the neutral version of the word skakkur, and this means crooked, but in the sense that, for example, not in the sense like a crooked winding road, but more example that if you have a straight line and then you have a line that is sort of crooked in this direction, like skakkur. Or if you hang up a picture and then it turns out that it's not exactly straight, but it's a little bit like this, then we call it the skakkur. And the neutral version of this word is skacht, and it still has the double K, but the double K and the single K and the single G, they all sound the same in this context when the T comes after them. So stacht, skacht, sacht, the sound is all the same. And this soft G sound that we talked about in the previous lesson. Then finally, if you have like a triple consonant, so you have a consonant and then the K and then the T, then the K becomes even softer. So one version of this is stert, stert. So then you have this RKT sound, and it's quite difficult to pronounce all of this in a row. So sterkt, sterkt would be quite tough. So instead, Icelandic people just say stert. And then the K comes almost like an H. There's maybe a hint of a K sound there, but it's mostly just the H. So it's stert, stert. Then finally, as we mentioned in the lessons about the L and the lessons about the N, sometimes if there are consonant next to these words, the N and the L becomes weird. So in this case, the K is normal, but the N or the L become a strange version of themselves. But the trick is that this doesn't always happen. So one example is the word tauch, tauch. Then you have the K and the N at the end, and then the N turns into this nose N that we talked about in the lesson about the N. Tauch, tauch. Sound comes from the nose. But if you have the KN and then the vowel, this doesn't always happen. So then, for example, you have the verb að sakna. Að sakna. Then the K is normal and the N is normal because it's sort of easy to say sakna. I'm not sure if you're a foreign speaker if the nose N is ever the easier version for you, but at least this is, I don't know, some kind of an Icelandic logic, I would say. Then when we have the L, almost always when we have a KL or an LK combination, the L becomes the soft L that you go out of the side of your mouth. Almost always. So one example is the very famous book that is called Salka Valka. Notice how my L's become just a breath through the side of my mouth. Salka Valka, which is a very famous book by the author Halldór Laxness, and this is the main character of that book, a female protagonist. Salka Valka. Then if we have the KL combination, one example is the word kukl. Kukl. And here the L also comes this soft thing at the side of your mouth, and kukl is first of all one of the name of a band that was one of the first band that Björk, our famous singer Björk, was in. And kukl actually means like an attempt at magic, let's see. So it's not actually magic, but it's something adjacent to magic, or when you're attempting to do magic. So that is what we called kukl. And this is all that we need to know for the letter K, so let's just go on to the homework. Here are the words of today. Try to see if you can remember how to pronounce them on your own, and if you remember the meaning of any of them. Use the pause button and then you can do it at your own pace. Now I'm going to go over it and give you the answer. Kirkja. Kirkja means a church. Að kyrkja. Að kyrkja means to strangle. Takk fyrir. Takk fyrir means thank you for. Ekki. Ekki means not. Stakt. Stakt means single in the neutral form. Skakt. Skakt means crooked or askew in the neutral form, and this word also is used in the male and the female form to describe someone who is high because of drugs, like he was high, hann var skakkur. Then there is the word stert. Stert, which is the neutral form of strong. Tákn. Tákn means a symbol. Að sakna. Að sakna is the verb to miss. Kakalaki. Kakalaki means a cockroach. Salka Valka. Salka Valka is a famous Icelandic book and female character. And then finally, kukl. Kukl means someone attempting at magic, usually in quite a harmless way. Thank you very much and see you in the next lesson. Bless, bless!